G'day everyone, back for our usual Friday chat. Thursday for you guys in the US and Europe. I've got some really interesting things to discuss today. Let me just start my timer. Where are we? Start. Oh, is it going? Yeah, it is. Let me just see if I can change this. There we go. So, yeah, we've got a stack of stuff to talk with you. We're in pre-show at the moment. Let me switch over to see who's here. I will put the timeline down below, so if you don't want to watch all the pre-show and stuff like that, you don't have to. But we've got roughly about 4 minutes of pre-show time. Let me just make sure that that's not on. No, it's not. So, who have we got here today? We've got... Dana's in here. Casper's saying Nikon is dead. He's into ARC already. Hero is here. Steve, good evening. Casper's saying it's hot in South Florida. It's pretty cool here today. Langston said that annoying feeling when you export a video, then find something on the last check before upload. I know, I do that all the time. I hate that. Then you've got to redo everything. It's horrible. Eli's here as well. Matthew said, looking forward to watching later after work. Reuben says, morning, David. Good morning, Reuben. Oreo said, good morning, Vietnam. Daniel just wanted to say hi. G'day, Daniel. Ben saying, dude. G'day, Ben. Carl, hello, David and friends around the globe. Sizzleman says, hello. Brett says, morning, David. G'day, Brett. Reuben said, just bought the Tamron 28-75. Can't wait to use it this weekend. I used it just yesterday, actually. I did, let me see, I've got an image up here that I took. Where are we? Let me just close mail. Open. I really love using that lens. It's really good too for studio work. I did this one yesterday. Let me just see if I can move it down a little bit. Did this lovely young lady with it yesterday. In my studio, just behind me actually. So I did that, love it. I think it's a great lens, great focal length overall, really sharp, love using it. So yeah, I did that yesterday with her. She's a lovely young lady that's starting up a modeling career. So that was what I did yesterday. Beautiful lens, it's certainly one of my favorite lenses. So let me move back to here. So I'm sure that you're going to love using that 28-75, Reuben. That's for sure. Daniel said, not sure how long I can stay. It's 2 a.m. in Amsterdam. I understand. Daniel, you can always watch on the replay, though. G'day, Dion. Good to see you in here. Oreo said, what camera are you using for live stream? It looks very clear. I'm using the A6400 Oreo. So that's what I'm using with this, with the Sigma 16mm. That's my favorite combo now at the moment. I'm just adore using that lens combination. That's exactly what I used. If you look at the review that I did of the, what was it that I reviewed the other day? Just trying to think. Oh, the gimbal that I use. Yeah, it's the exact review lens that I used when I showed this gimbal the other day, the Feiyu Tech. So that's the combo that I use for that, and it's fantastic. I also love the focal length. That 16mm on the A6400 is great. You know, and like I'm touching the lens now, so that's giving you an idea about how far away it is. I'm just touching it now, but it's a great focal length, particularly good for on a gimbal. I really love it. The more I've used the A6400, the more I love using it. The tracking and everything in that camera is just outstanding. Michelle said hello from Southern California. G'day, Michelle. Bob also said, Carl said, got a notification today. Yeah, I know, it's who knows. Some days you get notifications, some days you don't. It's a little bit crazy. Dana says, yes, Casper, it's hot in South Florida. Daniel says, hi, Oreo, enjoy your little interactions on the Facebook page. That'll be my photography, videography school page. That's nearly 5,000 subscribers now, guys. It's growing so fast, so please join us on there. If you haven't joined that site, I'll put the link down below later on. James says, hello, waiting on a hurricane. Well, that's not good, James. I hope you're fine and safe. Fed Watcher said, good morning or evening. It's 2 a.m. here in Amsterdam. Do GM says, cool, bullshit, it's freezing. Yeah, it is. What are we on today? It's a cold one today. It's 13 degrees Celsius today. We've got a cold couple of days ahead of us, but we can't complain. We've had a very mild winter. Oreo said, fantastic IQ, much clearer than your previous setup. It also depends too on Facebook compression as well, Oreo. It's, sometimes Facebook just compresses it as well. It might be just clear today. But I have used this in the last couple that I've done. Steve Wags here as well. Rob's saying g'day from Sydney. Oreo is saying hi to Daniel. Sizzleman said, David, how are you liking the Polo Pro ND you just got? Well, really good actually. I was surprised how nice that was to use the other day when I did that shoot for that gimbal. Check out that footage because it'll give you an idea about how it was, because I used the Polar Pro, that Peter McKinnon one, all day on that footage in the previous one where I reviewed that gimbal. So check that out if you want to see it. I will do a review of it eventually. I've got to go out and test it and say compare it to say using this other one that I've got here is a Hoya. So I'll test it, say, compared to the Hoya one as well, which will be interesting to see how they both go. But there certainly was no cast in it, which is really nice to see. I didn't have to correct for anything like that at all. The footage seemed to be really good. So, but I'll let you know, it seems to be pretty good. David said hello from Massachusetts. Flying High is saying hello from Indonesia. Long Rider, g'day Long Rider, is in here as well. Anthony said morning from Harkness. And C Stone says 3.5, 1.8 or 1.2. I'm going to discuss that. I'll discuss that in one of the chats because I'm going to talk about those lenses. So stay tuned for that because I'm going to go through all those lenses as well. How are we going for time? I'm going to start in a second. Altric saying hello everyone. David Johnson's where the mass are you? I'm not sure what that... Oh, he's talking to someone else. Casper said, I heard you're the bad boy. What you're going to... What you're going to, where I come from. I'm not sure what that means. I'm not sure who you're talking to there, Casper. G'day, Gerald. Doug said, caught you on a live one. G'day, Doug. Fade Watcher said, Sigma 16mm is my favourite lens for kind of everything. A must-have lens for low-light video. I love it. I really love that lens. It's fantastic. And like I said, particularly good on a gimbal. All right, guys, we're going to start. I've got to actually make sure we don't go too long today because I've got to go and get some white paper for my studio. I've got some big shoots happening over the weekend with a whole stack of models, so I've got to make sure that I leave myself enough time to go and get that after this. Conrad's saying hello from Ohio, and Long Rider said, I think David needs a gimbal for his shaky hands because he is always nervous. His wife will find out how much money he spent on his new gear. I know. Well, you know what? It's getting nervous too because the first story I'm going to talk about is going to discuss that. All right, let's go, guys. Let's get on to the show. Let me bring this up, and I'm going to put in the time. So what are we on? Oh, hasn't that started? Oh. Start stopwatch. Now it starts. Stupid thing. So how long have we been in? 3 minutes 05. 3:05. I'll just have to add that time on. So the show is starting at... Oh, I'm going to leave it. I'll do it later. It's too awkward to do it. All right, guys, let's go. So I'm going to put this up, and then we'll start the show. G'day, everyone. Back for our usual Sony Live rumours, news, and new releases and things like that. I've got some interesting things to discuss here. There has been some, obviously, some new releases this week that we're going to go through. We're going to talk about the... I've just got a donation too from Long Rider. Thank you so much, Long Rider. I'll just bring that up so everyone can see. Really appreciate that, mate. Yeah, we've got some really interesting releases from Sigma, particularly, including a new camera as well. We've obviously got the Sony 35 1.8 that I'm going to discuss as well. And we're going to start off today with a story about the cameras that Sony are possibly releasing, because it's meant to be announced on the 17th, which is only a few days away. So I thought I'd go over that a little bit again. I did talk about that with Aaron, but the show that I do with Aaron on the Wednesday here, it's Tuesday for you guys in the US and everything, is more sort of generic, whereas this is more Sony related. So I thought I'd go over it again with you guys and we can have a chat about that. So let's go on to the first story, and I'm going to put in 1:34. I'll just have to add 3 minutes on each one. So let's go, because we've got stacks to get through today. This is really interesting. Like I said, I did go through this with Aaron the other day, but I wanted to discuss it with you guys, seeing more Sony people will be in here today. We're still not sure what Sony are going to announce on this. They're still saying it's an SR5, so it looks like it's going to happen. And they're still saying it's going to be a new RX camera, which probably makes sense that they do release a new RX camera at this point of time. But they're saying the other camera is not APS-C. So what they're sort of hinting at, and it's interesting because I've heard a couple of people or rumors around the web saying it may be like a Sony A5 or something in that regards. What they're saying is it's going to be a lower end, a dumbed down full frame camera that may be released. And that could be to combat the Nikon Z5. Yeah, it wasn't the Sony A5. It was to combat the Nikon Z5, which is rumored to be announced very soon. I'm not sure if that's a good move by Sony, but like I said, I'd love to know what you guys think about this as well. I don't think that's a needed camera. I think that what could you take out of, say, the Sony full-frame camera if you wanted to dumb that down? Well, I'm not sure what you could really take it down. It's already 24 megapixels. Could you, say, take out some of the focusing? Yes, I suppose you could. Would it be in a different body and then, say, take out the EVF and then just have it just with your LCD screen at the back? Is IBIS going to be disappearing from that? We don't know. So I think it doesn't make much sense to me to have that camera. I'm not saying it's not going to happen, but I really don't think it's needed. I think the A7 III should stay as Sony's lower-ended camera, and remember, that's what Sony have called the A7 III. It is their lower-ended camera. And as that's now been out for a while, there's probably room to move on that in price anyway, and they could probably match any price that Nikon released with their Z5. They probably could release that with the A7 III, and that's probably going to beat whatever Nikon could release for that camera anyway. What we still need, and I'll talk about the Sigma announcement shortly as well, because that really is up the ante in video specs, but apart from focus, but I'll talk about that too shortly. But we still, and this is what I discussed with Aaron the other day, Sony are now starting to lack in the video department. Stills wide, that they're not lacking with anything at all. They're up there with the best of anything that's out there, but they're certainly lacking on the film side of things. So I'm surprised. If it is a dumbed down version, I will be surprised. I think they should be. If it was me releasing this thing and I was in charge of releasing it, I'd be releasing the A7000 next. That would be my next camera that I would be releasing, because like I've said before previously, they still haven't answered the X-T3. They still haven't answered Nikon's cameras that they've got out there for video specs. And they still haven't answered, say, Panasonic and things like that. It's clear that we're not going to get the A7S III until even announced before the end of the year. So it looks like that camera is probably going to be released sometime next year. And it just keeps getting pushed back further and further and further. The rumors have just gone dead on that. So that's really interesting. So they must be having issues with that camera, whether that's heating or something like that, or whether they are trying to, get a global shutter in that camera and they're waiting to really blow everyone out of the water with that. So I think it probably would be best to, say, release a really good high-end APS-C cameras that could bide Sony over in the meantime with better video codecs, better bit depths. Give us 4K 60. Now, that doesn't, even if it is a smaller body, it doesn't have to run for half an hour if you're doing 4K 60. Like I've said to people before, I only really shoot in clips of around 10 seconds. So I'd be happy if you can do 4K 60 for 10 minutes. And I would be completely happy with that, because I'm not going to be shooting long events in 4K 60p. I'm going to be shooting long events in 1080p. It's just the way that I work. I don't want that massive file size if I'm shooting a wedding, because there's no real point in that. It's too big a file size, it takes too long to edit, and there's no real need for it at this stage. So I always shoot the longer sections of weddings and things like that, or receptions, the speeches, in 1080p. So I'd be completely happy with 4K 60p for even a 5-minute time frame. At least it would give me that option to be able to shoot, you know, the bride and then slow it down 50% and keep that in 4K if I needed to do it. Or even for the better quality. Because remember, you are always better with the cameras to shoot at 4K and then down sample if you're shooting 1080p. So that's another issue as well. So I think Sony probably should be releasing a camera that's the a6-500 replacement. The a6-400 is great, and I love that camera now. But remember, due to the fact that there's no IBIS on that camera, you have to use that on a gimbal if you're shooting video. It's extremely hard to hand-hold that if you're shooting without IBIS. So we need that. The other thing too is I'd love them to bring out, say, an A7000 that does have dual card slots. I think it's the time has come where they need to make the ultimate A7 or A6-500 series, whatever that's going to be, more of a higher-ended model. I'd be happy to pay a bit more, but I'm hoping it's going to be about the same price as the XT3, which is what, about $1,500, something like that. I'd be happy to have that. But I think it's about time now that they add dual card slots to that series, because if they're going to sort of tout this as the higher-ended APS-C camera, it probably should have dual card slots like the XT3 does. We're definitely waiting for high bit depths, and I discussed that with Darren the other day, that, you know, you need that if you're a full-on videographer due to being able to push the files in grading, which you just can't do with your normal 8-bit footage that we've got at the moment. So that's also a really important thing. So it looks like the rumors are saying that we're going to get an RX camera and another camera. Now they're saying they've been told it's not an APS-C. Now we don't know whether that's true or not. I hope it's not a dumbed down version of full frame. I hope it is a new A7000 because that's needed. It's going to be really interesting to see what happens if Sony don't release another video like camera, like what, you know, an A7000 or an A7S III until the end of the year, because they really are then starting to fall behind. And I'm going to open up the chat in a minute because I'd love to know what you guys think about that. I do love shooting in 4K. I shot the video the other day that you can see when I use that Fuyatech gimbal. That was all shot in 4K and the footage was stunning. But if I wanted to slow that down, I couldn't. This is the issue. I would have loved to have had sections of that video where I could have slowed that down 50%, you know, by shooting 4K in Australia, it's 4K 50p, or for you in the US, it would be 4K 60. So it's a real bummer that we can't do that at this stage, and I really wish Sony would answer that problem for me, you know, and I really, sometimes I almost look and say, well, I'm going to go out and buy another camera, but look, I'm not going to at this stage, because if I do that, I know for certain Sony will release, you know, a 4K 60p camera, and then I'll be shattered that I actually did that. So I'm gonna hold out until the end of the year, if nothing is announced in that regard. But then if nothing is then announced by then, I may have to get a camera just for video that I can do 4K 60p, and whether that's Fuji, whether it's Panasonic, whether it's a Nikon or whatever is out there, I'm not sure. But you know, you can only wait so long. So I'm just hoping that's what happens. So let's open up the chat, because I'm curious to know what you guys feel about this. Let me just go back. Dwayne said 16mm Sigma is very cheap here in the US. I'm considering that than the Sony 24GM and maybe the Tamron 28-75. I currently have the 85GM and the 51.4. Remember, the 16 is an APS-C lens, though, Dwayne, so if that's what you're shooting, if you can put it on full frame, but it's going to then crop and you're going to have a smaller file size. It's okay if you've got an A7R III, but not if you've got the A7 III, because it'll be around about 11 megapixel or whatever that is, which may not be enough for what you want to do. Fine if you're dealing with Facebook and Instagram and stuff like that. Not really, though, if you want to print sort of decent files. But the Sigma 16 on APS-C is amazing. It's great, too, if you're doing full frame and you want to do video and shoot in APS-C mode, though. The other lenses you've got there are terrific. The Sony GM24 is great. I love that. I really do love that lens. And in some ways, I'm torn. And this is another thing that I'd like to discuss with you because I'm going to discuss the Sony 35mm 1.8 next. But in some ways, if Sony release an A7R4, now that is also a possibility as well. That may happen. If Sony release a A7R4, a 24mm may be the better lens to buy, the 24GM, because if you put that, say for instance the next Sony A7R4 is a 60 megapixel sensor, which is probably what it's going to be. It's either going to be a 60 megapixel sensor or it's going to be 100. We don't know what Sony will do with that camera, but it's certainly going to be a 60 megapixel sensor. Well then, if you go into crop mode with that camera, then you're starting to get usable files, because what are we dealing with then? It's going to be, probably 30 odd megapixel file, which is fantastic. So, and that will give you a 35mm roughly equivalent focal length with the 24mm. So if Sony bought out a A7R4 that was 60 megapixels, I think I'd prefer to buy the 24GM and use that in crop mode on that camera than, say, buy a 35mm, because you've got the benefit of having both focal lengths on there. It'll be about an f2 though, I think, if you take in the f-stop when you change it to when you change it into Super 35. So it's not a 1.8, but it's an f2. It's close enough. So that's probably what I would do now, and I'm going to wait a while to see what happens. But if an A7R4 comes out, that's certainly, and it's say 60 megapixels, that certainly may be a camera that I would be tempted to buy, and the 24 GM would be fantastic on that. Let me just go back to the chat. Long Rider said, everyone has a little, they're just mucking around with one another. Daniel said, not needed. If the A7 III becomes the A7 Mark IV, and the A7 III will move into that slot. I agree, Daniel. I don't think that there is a need for a lower-end camera. I think the A7 III should be their lower-end camera. It's been out for a little while now. And like I said, they probably have got room to push the price down if they need to match whatever Nikon does with a Z5. So I think that's probably the way it should be. And I hope they don't release another lower-end camera and then that's it for the year. That's what I'm dreading happening, because I am waiting on something with better video specs, that's for sure. Rob said A7RF new 6 megapixel sensor. Yes, I think, Rob, I think it will be a 60 megapixel sensor. That's my guess anyway. That's what I'm thinking it's going to be. That's why I'm saying the 24GM is going to be the perfect lens in that scenario, because in crop mode, it's going to be a 35mm f2. Fantastic. You've got the best of both worlds with also a beautiful lens. And remember, that is a stunning lens, the 24GM. And I think that might be the way I'll go. Rather than getting the 35. Or I may get the Sigma, which I'll talk about soon as well. Haas says, good point, David. The A7 III was referred to as the basic model. Yes, it was, and it still is. It still is the basic model. And the interesting thing is, like I said, I'd love to know in the chat, what do you think they could take out? If there is like an A7 II Mark I or whatever, I don't know what they're going to call this thing. A6 or something, I don't know. But if that is the case, what could they take out of that camera? Because if it's too close to the A7 III, no one will buy the A7 III. So I'm not sure. I'm not convinced that it's a good move at all by Sony if that's what they're going to do. Gerald says the low-end full-frame mirrorless so far are not selling. I hope Nikon and Sony don't rush to the bottom of the market. People are buying more A7 IIIs than the Nikon Z6, EOS R, and the EOS RP cameras total. Yeah, and that's the thing. The lower end ones aren't selling that well, and that's a very good point, Gerald. So yeah, it's certainly something to consider about, and I don't think it's a good move by Sony if that's what they're going. It may not happen. Remember, we're only talking about an SR5 rumor. So it might be that there's a new camera coming out, which is an A7000, and I'm hoping that's what the case is. Brett said A7 III is the basic entry camera. but it's more than the A7, and the A7 II is more the entry-level cameras. Yeah, I mean, they are still there, aren't they, those cameras? That they are still for sale. Yeah, I agree with what you're saying there, though. Casper said, I would like the A7000 also. Yeah, I agree. Dion said, just read an article that said the A7 III video is better than the XT3 video. From what I've seen, Dion, it's not better. No, it's not. Not if you're dealing with the higher bit depths and everything else. Even if you check what Aaron has sort of done, he's done extensive testing on it. I think you'll find that if you do go out to the higher bit depths, that the Fuji will be better. Remember, you're dealing that you've got 4K 60 there, and you've also got 400 megabits. There's no way the A7 III can beat that. It might look okay, but if you start to push it in post, if you're a full-on videographer, there's no way that the A7 III could beat that camera if you're dealing with higher bit depths. It looks fantastic, though. Don't get me wrong. For me, shooting the way I do, the video footage looks stunning, and it does. It actually looks stunning. But I still think the Fuji would probably, and remember, I'm just guessing here because I haven't used the X-T3 for video footage, so I'm only going by what I've seen in reviews and the specs, and it might be different if you're using it, but I'm only going by what Aaron has told me, who's used both systems extensively. But I do know that even Photomic was saying that when he shoots with his Nikon with the higher bit depths, that the video footage is unbelievable. And I think Tony Northrup did tests on that as well, where the Nikon was definitely sharper. I think Casey also did it too from Camera Conspiracies. He did a test on the Nikon as well, I believe, a video I watched a while ago. And when he shot with the Nikon, the video footage was stunning. Anyway, but look, I suppose there's so many articles. Some say that other things are better, some say they're not. I'm not saying the article's wrong, Dion. It's just that, you know, there's so many articles and things out there. But I think you just can't beat physics. If you're talking about bit depth, it's like using the difference of trying to edit a JPEG as against edit RAW. You've got that much more leeway to pull and push things, lift your shadows, not have gradients in the sky. Things like that. That's what you miss when you don't have higher bit depths. And there's no getting around that fact. Long Rider said, Casper, I'm with you. I have the money ready to be spent, and I'm going to be in trouble if they release something good, that's for sure. Daniel said, whatever they release, I wonder what new tech is inside. What parts do they move forward with? I know, I agree, Daniel. It is going to be interesting to see what happens. Jay Grader says, are you going to talk about the Sigma's first smaller? Yes, I am. I'm going to talk about that as one of the stories today. Gerald said, Sony needs a high-end APS-C with great video specs. That will hold folks over. And that's what I think Sony should be doing too. It will hold people over to next year. I mean, it might be the case, for instance, if they released a A7000 or an A6700 that was really good, I'd probably buy it straight away. And then I may then sell that if they release an A7S later this year, or it'll be next year, I think. If they release that and that's way better, I probably would buy that. So it would tide people over. And I think Sony would do very well out of that. I agree with you. What else have we got? Casper says, I use the A7R II with the 24G Master. It's fantastic. Yeah, that's such a great lens. Daniel also said, love the 24, even on the A7R III. Lona says, I know I would rather get a native Sony lens. Sigma is also not known to have great autofocus. Well, I'm not sure I agree with that, Erlen, because when I use the 105 and the... these are the Sigma Sony mounts. When I used those and also the 135, it was so close to the Sony focusing that, to be really truthful, I wouldn't have really known the difference unless I when I put the Sony lens back on, yes, it may have been a fraction quicker, but if you're using it without doing that, the Sigma lenses shock me how good they are. And I've done testing, and you can have a look at those tests because I've done videos on it. They worked incredibly good. So I think the days of saying the Sigma lenses aren't very good are not really true anymore. The new lenses are really quite outstanding. Casey said, I think they're going to do something stupid like 4K 60p and take out picture profiles. Well, let's hope not. Dion said the X-T3 falls apart at higher ISO. Yeah, that is true, Dion. Because it's not full frame too, remember. It will never do what a full frame camera does. But you know what? Having said that, Dion, check out Aaron's video because he did some tests where he compared the A7, I think it was the A7 III, to the Fuji X-T3. And he did very high ISO testing on that. And boy, they were close. He exposed correctly though. But check, I don't know what the link is, but if you go onto Aaron's channel, you'll find it. And check what that is. I was surprised how well the Fuji held up. Leslie said, what's the best lens for recording on the A7R3? Leslie, what do you mean by recording? Do you mean video? It depends what focal length you want. I love the Tamron, though, the 28-75, just because it's so light. That's the reason why I love doing video with that so much, particularly if I'm going to throw it on a gimbal. I adore that lens. I also love the 55. The Sony 55 is one of my favorite lenses on video as well. Great focus, beautiful depth of field, and it's also so light as well. So they're probably my two favorite lenses for video. Nivak said, really hope Sony doesn't pull a Canon and release a crippled mirrorless camera. Yeah, that's what worries me as well. Eli, A-mount, the thing is still alive. Yeah, they're not giving it much love though, are they? Maybe a lower price full frame to compete with the EOS RP. Maybe, but I hope not though, Long Rider. Holy crap, the Sigma 35 1.2 is 1,500. Yeah, it's not cheap, but I suppose, look, if you compare it to the Sony, it's not that expensive, is it? So that's how you have to look at it, I suppose. The article said the Sony was still sharper than the X-T3. Gerald said, I have noticed E-mount Sigma lenses that focus as well as my Sony lenses in stills and video. Adapted Sigma lenses not as well. Yeah, and I agree, Gerald. They do. They focus incredibly well now. The interesting thing was, and that's why I was glad when I got that Sigma 135, because that was the adapted one. And I used the Sigma MC11 with it, and that was outstanding. I could not believe how well that lens focused with the MC11 on it. And I've got videos to prove that again. It was absolutely stunning. So I've got no doubt that these new lenses from Sigma are probably going to focus very, very well. Eli says, what about video autofocus? Well, video autofocus I tested as well and they were fine. Yeah, the two lenses that I've tested, the 105 and the 135 for video were fine. Yes, they might have been a fraction slower than Sony, but it's not that you'd really notice. This is the thing, like I said, unless you were putting one lens on one after the other, they were both very, very good. Silent and yep, they were great. I hope the next Sony camera is 4K 60. Casey said it's better. They're capable like 4K 120 frames per second on some of the new sensors. I think he's answering someone else. Dion says the A7 III already competes with the EOS RP. Why do they need to do a cheaper version? Yeah, I hope they don't, Dion. That's for sure. It is appalling that companies. It is appealing that companies to push for higher frames, 200 plus in 1080, to push for higher resolutions. Look, it's more the fact that you want to for slow motion. That that's the issue. That people like to have that ability to slow the cameras down. So it's certainly important for a videographer. That's for sure. Last question before I go on to the next story is Jake said, I have the Sony Zeiss 35 1.4. Do you think it's worth buying the new Sigma just for the 1.2 aperture? Or will it not make much of a difference when it comes to depth of field and low light? I sold my Sony 35 1.4 due to the fact that I sort of had an inkling that Sigma were going to produce that lens. And also I got the 24 as well. I don't think it's worth selling just to buy the lens straight away. Look, 1.2 is going to be lovely to shoot at that aperture, but I would probably just wait to see how it reviews. And when I say reviews, make sure you get some impartial reviews before you make a decision on it about selling it. I don't think it's worth selling. Look, you're not going to gain anything with weight. It's a big lens. It's a big honking lens. it's hard to say without using it. I wouldn't recommend just swapping it over at this stage without actually trying it to see what it's like. Deepak, but there is a thing to say too though, Jake, is the lens I had, the Sony 35, was very good. But if you read the news groups out there, it seems to be that the Sony 35 has a hell of a lot of variations. So you can get a bad quality one as well as a good quality one. I did have a good quality one, but there are also some bad quality ones. When I say bad, they're not as sharp. They have a lot of chromatic aberrations and things like that. And I think some of them can be decentered as well. I read somewhere as well. So it just depends. But I would probably wait and just see what happens there as well. But the 35 1.2 does interest me. I have to be honest in that regard. It does interest me a lot. Because shooting low light events, that would be superb to take into a low light event. Like do receptions and weddings when they're doing the dancing and stuff like that would be beautiful to open that lens right up and let as much ambient light in as you can, because I'm using less and less flash in those sort of scenarios. All right, let's go to the next story. 27:33. All right, so the Sony 35 1.8, I was going to have a bit of a discussion with you about this lens that's just been announced. I mean, it's basically the same size as this. So it's roughly the same size as my 50mm. It's basically the same size as that. I think it's a little bit bigger. So that gives you an idea about the size that it actually is. So if you're after a really small 35mm 1.8, it's a really good lens to get. You're also getting, if you look down here as well, you're also getting, I think there's another picture down here somewhere. You're also getting the AF/MF switch, and you're also getting the control there too, your focus hole button as well. So, you've got, it's interesting that you've got those there. So that's one thing. But remember, this is not a GM lens. This is a G-rated lens, so it's not even a Zeiss lens. Whereas the 55mm, a lot of people are going out saying that, that the 55 is more expensive and stuff. But the 55 is the Zeiss. It's got that Zeiss badge, so it is a Zeiss lens. This is not a Zeiss lens, and it's not a GM lens. This is just a G lens. And they're asking $748 US. I think, and I know some of you are going to disagree with me, but I think this lens is $150 overpriced. It's not a GM. It's only a 1.8. It's not even a Zeiss lens, so I think it's overpriced. Yes, it might have the new focus motors in there. I think Brett mentioned that in another discussion that we went about as well. But I still think it's $150 overpriced to what it should be. But like I said, if you want a very small, lightweight 35mm that's reasonably fast, I mean, it's not a 1.2 or 1.4, but it's a 1.8, it seems to be that this will be a nice lens. Am I going to buy this lens? No, I'm not. This lens doesn't interest me one little bit, particularly at that price range. If it was around about 550, whatever, I might have considered it. But certainly not for that price range. It looks like the results that you're getting from it are pretty good. It seems that it's a fairly nice lens to use. Good that they're, like I said, fantastic that they're expanding it, their lens lineup. But remember too, this is a perfect matchup with the 85. But I just wish they brought this in a little bit cheaper for people that did want to come in more on the lower end. And like I said, it could have been $150 cheaper, I believe, than what they're asking for it. Apart from that, though, it looks like it's going to be a decent lens. I mean, I can't talk about quality because I haven't used it yet, but I'm sure it's going to be good. If it's as good as the 85 1.8, it really is going to be a nice lens. I just think it's a little bit overpriced for what it actually is. Let me just go to the chat because I want to have a quick see what you guys are saying. If you're saying anything about this. So Daniel's gone to bed. I don't blame you. It's late over there. Kevin says he's excited about the 35 1.2. Would love. I'm going to talk about the Sigma lenses next, Kevin. Would love the 85 1.2 also. Yeah, I'd love that as well. Ha said, David, you can finally use the Sigma 35 1.2 to defend against the kangaroos. Yeah, I love it. Can't wait to see your test reviews, David. Yeah, hopefully I might be able to get those lenses. I'll ask CRK Kennedy. I'll see if I can get some review samples of those lenses. I will be able to get them. It's just a matter of when. I'm not sure how soon they get them though, but I'll ask Aaron and see if he can get me a copy of those lenses. I'd love to try them. One particularly interests me, and I'll talk about that shortly. Photomiac's in here. G'day, Photomiac. Jake said, I bought three 35 1.4 before I got a sharp one. Yeah, this is what I've heard, Jake. I might have been lucky because mine was sharp straight away. There was a lot of variations apparently on that lens. I've heard that a lot. Kevin said the Sigma will have the switch and button too. Yes, they will, and I'll show that shortly because they're designed for the Sony this time. Photomiac says, I agree it's overpriced, but it should be nice. Yep, I agree. It should be a nice lens, but I think that they've just put a Sony tax on it, unfortunately. What is the best photo focus these days? Well, it's the focus that are in these linear linear focus motors in the 135 and the 400mm f2.8 are outstanding. They're the new ones, and I believe Brett told me, whether it's true I'm not sure, but Brett said that had those new focus motors in it. So what else have we got? So that's interesting. Whether he'd heard that or whether that's not correct, I'm not sure, because I haven't read that anywhere yet. But Lemma said, I think it's good that Sony is expanding their lens lineup. Exactly. It certainly doesn't hurt that for sure. Yes, it's overpriced. Casper said, I heard we stand together coming for a I think he's going on at Photomiac again. Nivek said the 35 1.8 isn't even a G, is it? It's just an FE lens. Yep, that's right. And no OSS. Yep. This is why I'm saying I think it's overpriced. Just because it's only just a normal FE lens, it's not Zeiss, it's not a GM, it's overpriced. And I just think that no matter how you look at it, that lens should have been $200 to $150 cheaper than what it is. It's just my opinion, but Carla said, not for that price range for sure. That's a no-go for me. Oreo said, I think the 35 1.8 is not an amateur lens. It's a prosumer lens for pros that need to travel light and do a lot of gimbal work. Photomiac said, I agree, David. Brett said, the new 35 1.8 is using the new linear focus rails. Yeah, so see, Brett's saying there it is. So the lower lenses are using the new technology, not even the 85 1.8 uses that, and it probably means that all the lenses that are going to be released from now on will have those linear motor rails. Aldrich said, I think I will get it. I was waiting on the 1.8. Do you think Sony will come out with a 14 to 24? Excuse me a minute. Well, I hope so. Look, I hope they do. I'm going to talk about that lens next, so just wait and I'll discuss that in a minute. Nivak said, I think the 35 1.8 was a necessary lens for the full frame lineup, but most in the chat probably already have others covering that focal length. I want the 24-70 2.8. Should I go for the Sigma or Tamron? It depends if you need the wider lens. If you need 24mm, you could obviously get the 24-70. It just really depends on that. My honest suggestion would be to get the Tamron and then buy a 24mm lens as well, or a wider prime. That's what my suggestion to you would be, because I do love the Tamron, and I think that's the amount that you save from, say, getting the GM. You could just buy the Tamron and then buy, you'd be well on the way to getting the 24mm GM. That's just what I'd be doing, though. Casper said the 24-7 GM. I know Oreo's just bought the 24-70 GM and he loves it. David said, just debating on if I should buy the 135 1.8 from Sony. I love that lens. Yeah, it's one of my favorite lenses now. I love it. I adore it. So I can't say any more than that. I will put up a review of that lens shortly. Altric said, I have the Samyang 35, that's okay, but I like to mention that, I mentioned before I want to go all Sony. Yeah, so you're thinking about selling that. What else have we got? Brett said, I did read it somewhere, laugh out loud. Yeah, I haven't been able to find that, Brett, and I'm not sure where I've seen that. So if you can find it, just share it to us, because yeah, I haven't read anywhere that it's got that new linear focus motors. I thought they would have mentioned that, but they don't seem to have mentioned it anywhere. Tony says it's very overpriced. Gerald said the 135 GM is not cheap, but oh, it's so worth buying. It's stunning. I agree it is. It's so stunning. I think Sony is taking advantage of the hype and overpriced the 1.8 35. Eric said I pre-ordered it. Deepak said if you want a cheap FE Prime, get the 28 f2. Yes, I know. Gerald raved about that lens too. I've used it in the shop, but I've not really used it extensively. Altrix says I have the 135 Canon mount as well. All right, so let's move on to the next story. This is talking about the Sigma lenses, because there's some of these that are very interesting. Let me just bring this up. So there's three of them that have been announced. By the way, I'm just showing this because you can obviously pre-order the 35 1.8 now. You can order, and I'll discuss these lenses in a minute. You can order the Sigma 35 1.2 Art lens, and it is $1,499. So you can pre-order that now. The Sigma 14 to 24, 14 to 24 is $1,399, and the Sigma 45 Contemporary is $459. So you can order all of those at the moment. So let's look at these lenses anyway. I've got a few things that I can show you here, and I'll put all the links down below so you can have a look at these as well. But it's interesting. The Sigma 35 1.2 Art lens, I'm certainly interested in this lens due to the fact that I'd love to try the 1.2. Like I said, I'm shooting more and more of events and weddings and things like that where it's very low light, and I'm trying not to use flash anymore because I like to capture all of the ambient light that's around. So I'm trying to use more available light and some continuous light. So having a 1.2 aperture is fantastic. Now, it's not, people then go, yes, but only a certain amount's in focus. It's not the way I shoot because I'm usually a decent way back. So if you're a decent way back from your subject, if you shoot at 2.1 or 1.2, most of it's in focus anyway. It's more to do with how close you are to that subject shooting at 1.2. If you get close, yes. If you're close to something, yes, then it will go out of focus very, very quickly. But if you're a fair way away, having a faster aperture can be a real big advantage. These lenses are going to be built like tanks, though. I know that. I understand that completely. So if you're after lightweight gear, they're certainly probably not going to be the ones that you'd want to have. So, like I said, the Sigma 35 1.2, and I'll open up another window in a minute and show you these lenses, but the Sigma is $1,499, so $1,500, which I think is very, very comparable with the Sony 35 1.4. I can't remember if anyone can let us know in the chat what that is, but I think the Sony may be a bit dearer, I think. I could be wrong, but I think the Sony is dearer. I'm sure I paid more than that. The 14 to 24, that's a lens that really interests me. And the Sigma 45, not so much. There's some images down here that you can look at to see the sizes. Now, I did look at the MTF charts, and the interesting thing is the 35 is pretty good, but the really interesting one is the 14 to 24. The 14 to 24, the MTF charts on that are really quite good. So it looks like if you're dealing with MTF charts, and look, and I don't really pay much attention to them because I like to do real-world reviews and have a look at how they look in real life. Like I said, I'm not into shooting brick walls and things like that. I like to shoot real things. But I always have a glance at them to see what they're showing, and it looks like the 14 to 24 MTF charts are really nice. I mean, really nice. Now, I'll switch to the here because I can show you through the lenses the comparison of them. Now, why the 14 to 24 4 interests me so much is because I had that lens when I shot Nikon. The 14 to 24, yeah, I love that lens. It was bulbous at the front. Some people are complaining because you can't put NDs on the front, which are variable. Well, you can't do that on any of those lenses. You couldn't do that on the Nikon either. You had to use the big filter kits to stick on the front, and you couldn't get around that. But I adored that Nikon 14 to 24, and that was one lens particularly that I hated to let go. So it's really interesting now that... Oh, Brett's just sent me a thing there too. Thanks, Brett. I'll have a look at that later. It's really interesting that Sigma have brought that out now, and that's one I certainly want to test. Now, to show you the size comparison of how these looks, the Sigma is on the left-hand side there. That's the 35 1.4. You've got the 35 1.2 in the middle, and the Zeiss 35 1.4 there as well. I hate it when they do these and they don't put the cover on, because to me, that is just a stupid thing to do, because why are you showing it without the cover on the Sony? And I don't understand why they do that. They're not that much different if you look at the size overall. If you look at where that red line is that's going through, they're not that different to one another. But and so that's something to consider. I can't remember about the weight though, because I'd have to go through them and compare them all again. And we can look at the weight perhaps in the comment boxes down below. People can tell me about what they think about that. But overall, I think if you're looking at these, size, really, depending on these, I really don't think it matters that much. When you're dealing with lenses that are sort of around that weight and size, they're all pretty well going to be fairly similar. So I think now if I was buying now, just coming in, I'd still want to wait for testing on this though, but I think I would probably buy the Sigma 35 1.2. Just to have that extra stop of light. For me, doing events, when I need that stop of light, would be amazing to have. So that's probably where I would go in that regard. Let's look at the next one down though, which is the wide-angle lenses that are available. Again, very similar in size if you look at the three of them. Again, I don't know about weight though. I'm sure the Sigma probably will be heavier. The Sigma 16 to 35, I've got the f4 version, which I love. But the Sigma 14 to 24, that is a great focal length. I used to love having that 14mm when I had my Nikon. I adore that. Like I said, I adore that lens. And I believe also it has a filter slot on the 14 to 24 that you can fit the filters on the end. I believe that's the case. I'll have to look at that, but I think that's the case. If that is true, just to be able to drop a filter in would be amazing, and that would be fantastic. You can see there too the difference with the Tamron. Similar size, but the Tamron would weigh, it'd be minuscule compared to having the other wide-angle lens. These probably aren't showing, I'm not sure how accurate these are showing in width though. They may be more accurate in height, because the Tamron is very, very, it is quite narrow. It was, like I said, a little bit smaller than this one that I've got. So... looking at that now, the one that interests me out of all of those is I'd like to have a look at this. I would love to have a look at that Sigma 14 to 24mm. We're really missing something on the wide end. Yes, the 16 to 35 is good on the Sony. The Tamron 17 is even decent as well, but it's if you need more room to go wider, like for instance, if you're in a small room and you're trying to photograph a bride, you know, it could be an issue. And I showed, just to show you, I'm not sure whether I can get that out. Let me just have a look. No, I think it's closed. I did have a bridal shot that I could show the other day. I don't think it's in here. No, it's not there. It's all right. I can't show you. But I shoot a lot. Someone said to me the other day, you don't shoot portraits with a wide-angle lens. And I disagree with that. I do it all the time. I shoot brides all the time with a wide-angle lens. Particularly if you're like in rooms where they're tight and you need to get back and then still get the whole vista of the room with the bride there against windows. And it can make the bride look amazing because you get the long train and, you know, they look beautiful. If you get down low, the bride looks so tall and epic. So I use them all the time. So to have the 14 to 28, would be amazing. So out of any of these lenses at the moment, and if you look at the MTF charts look very good on that Sigma 14 to 24. I think if I was buying these without looking at anything at the moment, remember I haven't tested it yet and I will test it eventually. If I hadn't tested any of these yet, I reckon that I would go with the 14 to 24. 2.8 due to the fact of having that. But that's a lot. That is a big difference having a 14mm and a 16mm. So that's probably what I would go for. And I think knowing Sigma and knowing the two lenses that I've tested, the 105, boy, it's pouring down, the 105 and the 135, those lenses optically were superb. The 105 particularly was unbelievable. I've got no doubt that the Sigma 14 to 24 will be sharp as. It'll be a beautiful lens. So I think that might be a really good selling lens for Sony. I really do think that. And again, you're probably going to save money over what you would with the 16 to 35 GM. That's for sure. And then the last one we can look at here is the Sigma 45, or they're just showing it against the Zeiss, which is tiny, that little Zeiss 2.8. That one doesn't interest me as much, and looking at the MTF charts, they're not as good, I don't think, either. But a lot of people like shooting with the 45mm focal length. I think Gilbert loves it. I'm not really that happy with that. I prefer 35 and the 55 or the 50. But at least it's another option that we've got there that people can get if we want to. I'm just curious down here. Let's see what most people are choosing. I'd say I'd prefer the 14 to 24 out of this as the main lens. Let's see what people are mostly choosing. Where is it? Where'd that go? It's disappeared. Oh, well, that was stupid. I was interested to see what it showed. No, it's gone. So let's just quickly go over the chat. I'm curious to know what you guys think. That 14 to 24 looks unbelievably interesting to me. So Dwayne said, I have the 85 GM. How do you compare the new 135? I shoot 70 to 200 at 135 and get spectacular results. Yeah, look. I very rarely now use my 85 anymore, but that's the 1.8 batter, so I still love it, and I have to use that occasionally when I have to move in closer, like in the studio yesterday. But if I've got the room to move, I will grab the 135 in a heartbeat. If you're doing just faces, the 135 is the most beautiful focal length that you can use. Remember, it's also a 1.8. It's got way faster focus than the 85 1.4, way faster due to those new linear focus motors in it. So it's superb, unbelievably sharp. I can't say anything better than it's one of the best lenses I've ever used. I love it. That and the 24 are stunning. So in fact, I very rarely use my 70 to 200 anymore. I'm still going to take it to weddings if I need more reach, but I'm often grabbing the 135 more than I'll grab my 70 to 200. So yes, I'd say, Dwayne, if you can afford the 135, I would get it in a heartbeat. It's stunning. Gerald said, I would sell all the Canon and get the Sony, faster focusing and sharper. Lens Rental says it's the sharpest lens they have ever tested. That's the 135 you're talking about, are you, Gerald? Nathaniel said, I really love the old Sony 35 on my a6400, but that lens was like $300. Yeah. Brett said, David Oastler, petapixel mentions in the post of the 135 1.8. Thanks, Brett. Thanks for clearing that up. Even with those new motors, I think it's still overpriced, though, Brett, for being not a GM lens. Lama said, 2.8 prime feels weird. Are you talking about the Sigma 45? Jess said, I have a Sony 12 to 24 f4, which I'm very pleased with, but the 14 to 24 2.8 from Sigma, I have become very doubtful whether I should sell my Sony lens and instead buy the upcoming Sigma. Jess, it's a hard decision. That 12 to 24 is a lovely lens. It's f4 though, isn't it? I'm pretty sure that's an f4, isn't it? Or is that a 2.8? I thought it was f4, but the all I can go by is what the Nikon 14 to 24 was like. It was stunning, and that probably is the most interesting wide-angle lens that I've seen come out. So I'm dying to try that one. Jay said, but brick walls are real things. Gerald, not the way I shoot though. Gerald said, I got first in line at my dealer for the 14 to 24 2.8 Sigma. Yeah, I think you're probably going to love it, Gerald, if it's anything like the Nikon one. Carl said, the new 35 1.8 has linear focusing motors. Sony website. Yeah, thanks. Brett cleared that up too. Fast response and high precision of the lens linear focus AF drive system ensure precise, quiet autofocus operation. Carl said probably good for 20 frames per second on the A9. That will be interesting, Carl, too, to see if they give you that. It should be, seeing it's a newer lens. You would hope so. Gerald said the 12 to 24 Sigma has a rear filter mount. Yes, it does. You're talking about the 14. Yes, it does, Gerald. That's a great thing because it's got a filter mount at the end, so you can put a filter in. So you can just put it can't be variable, of course. But you can stick in a ND, like whatever it might be, an ND8 or ND9, whatever you'd like to do. That's a great feature. Another reason why I think the 14 to 24 landscape photographers are going to love that lens. Michelle said the Sigma 35 1.2 is 2.5 pounds, 109 grams. Yeah, it's not light. But I wouldn't expect that for a 1.2 lens anyway. I mean, I would have expected that to be sort of pretty heavy anyway. It's going to be interesting though to see how it focuses, being so big and such big glass it's moving around. I can't wait to test it. But remember, being so wide too, focus is not such a big issue. That's the thing you've got to understand about that as well, because nearly everything's in focus anyway. Oreo said the height comparison for the 14 to 24 is deceiving because it has a bulbous front element that protrudes beyond the red line. Yeah, and that's a good point actually too, Oreo. It'll be like the Nikon where it has the same bulbous element as well. Nathaniel said, any thoughts between the 14 to 24 Sigma versus the new Tamron 17 to 28? Look, it depends on... If I had the money, I'd buy both. I really would. If I was purchasing now, I haven't got either of those lenses. If you need it on a gimbal, the 17 to 28 would be the best lens that's available. I think the 17 to 28 Tamron is going to be the best video lens that's available. And I do believe that after using it extensively for that. I used it for hours when I shot Rebecca for that. When I did the test of the 17 to 28. I should be able to get that lens back in a couple of weeks. But that, I think, is the best gimbal lens or video lens that is available. As long as you don't want to go past 17. If you're dealing with, say, wanting something that does go very, very wide, I would think that the Sigma would be the better lens because it's going to go to 14mm. So if that matters to you, obviously the Sigma is a better lens for you in that regard. It just depends really on what you'd like to carry. If you want a very light system, the Tamron is the way to go. If you want for video, I think the Tamron is still the way to go because it's so light that you can stick that on a gimbal easily and walk around with that all day. But if you want to go really wide, I think the 14 to 28 is the one to get, and I would get that over the G Master, but particularly because that extra 2mm on the wide end is substantial, particularly if you're working in tight environments. It really is. Also, to have the built-in ND is fantastic. But that's just my opinion at this stage. Michelle said the Sigma 35 1.4 is 1.5 pounds. I can handhold all day long. In fact, I have multiple times. So you're saying that's, yeah, so it's a little bit heavier though, isn't it, Michelle, than the Sigma 35, but you'd expect that. Hopefully Sony will make a 14mm prime lens. Yeah, I agree with you, Brett. That's one thing now Sony really lacks is a wide-angle prime. Gerald says, Sigma says they have developed the 14 to 24 2.8 with astrophotography in mind with no coma, and like the 24 1.4 GM. Well, it looks like that if you look at those MTF charts, Gerald. I agree with you. The MTF charts look very sharp on that. They really do. Just let me check, because someone just gave a donation. Bobby, thank you so much, Bobby. Really appreciate that donation you just gave. That means a lot to me. All great lenses. It's a very hard choice. It is. And we are blessed now. It's like I've said before, we are so blessed now in the Sony realm that we can have all this gear that we can put onto things. Adrian said, I read that one. Brett said, shooting with wide angles for portraiture can be done. You just need to know how to do it. Exactly. You just have to be careful. I've seen the new Tamron lens at my local camera shop. The Tamron rep was in town. Yeah, I loved it. I really did love it. Gerald says he dropped my pre-order of the Tamron 17 to 28 2.8 and got a pre-order of the Sigma 14 to 24 mil. I have Sigma art glass and know they will be super. Yep, I can completely understand, Gerald, because you're not so much into video like I am, and I think that will be a superb lens. Deepak says, for the 14 to 24 is the best choice for general purpose, low light, wide angle shots. I think it probably will be, yes. But wait for the full testing. If you're not sure about this, wait for full testing. But the MTF charts seem to show that it's going to be incredibly sharp. And look, like I said, Sigma now aren't releasing bad lenses. Tamron aren't releasing bad lenses now. Samyang aren't releasing bad lenses now. They're all now up to the point where you can be confident that they're going to be pretty darn good. Is a Sigma 2470 coming out? Well, I'm sure it will. I'm really looking forward to a Tamron 70 to 200. I think that'll be next from Tamron. I'm torn. Michelle says, I'm torn between the Tamron 17 to 28 2.8 and this new Sigma 14 to 24. I think I may have to save more money. Yeah, if you're not sure, Michelle, wait. Like I said, if you're doing video, if you are doing a mix of video and stills, I would recommend the Tamron, only because the Sigma is going to be too heavy to hold in a video scenario. And 17 mils for me tends to be wide enough for anything I need to shoot in video. So I think that's probably the way you look. If you're looking at hybrid, I would go the Tamron. If you're looking at general like photography and you want to do landscapes, you want to be able to work in tight environments, I think that the Sigma is probably going to be the lens to get. Don't forget though too, the Sony 16 to 35 is also a great lens. But having that 14 mil is a big deal extra if you're dealing with having that extra wide focal length. Remember too, it also depends, the Sony also goes up to 35, so that's another thing that you have to consider as well. So if you love that 35 mil focal length, well then that brings the Sony into play. It's really hard because there's no perfect lens here. It really just depends on how you would like to shoot. Each lens has a benefit in itself. Like if you love to shoot 35 and you don't want to be using a prime, the only one you can go with there is the 16 to 35. I've got the f4 version of that lens. But like I said, the one that interests me the most out of all of these is the 14 to 24. Nathaniel says, yeah, 14 mil versus 17 is a bit of a difference for sure. Love landscape, so I'll probably get the Sigma. Can anyone report on focusing on any Sigmas? Well, I found they're fantastic, Nathaniel. Brilliant, the latest lenses. I'm sure these probably will be the same. I mean, you can't say 100% sure. I haven't used them yet. I can only go by the 105, and that was moving big glass. That was the 105, 104, and it was amazing. It was outstanding how well that worked, and the 135 were brilliant. Bobby says, I need to work out for the Sigma lenses. Filter rear mount is good. I agree with you. It is. That is a great feature. Gerald says, of course, I'm taking my 24 GM, never leave home without that. Carl said, hi Dave, watching with my daughter Jamie. Hi Jamie, and how are you, Carl? Love if you could give me a thumbs up too, guys. I really would appreciate that. It does help the channel. Just Willie said, thank you so much, Bobby, for the donation as well. Oh, got another. Nathaniel gave a donation too. Thanks, really appreciate these live chats you have. Thank you so much, Nathaniel. What's your opinion on the 2470 GM for video? Well, it's It's fine. It's just a bit heavy. For me, I think that's way too heavy. I would prefer the Tamron 28 to 75 in a heartbeat due to the fact of the weight alone. It's just way smaller. If you're dealing with it, carrying it around in a gimbal, it's just that much lighter. So if you're doing it for video, I would say I would get the Tamron for sure. But that's me. If you don't mind it being heavier, the 2470 would be fantastic. Carl says, definitely want the Sigma 14 to 24. It's on my wish list. Yeah, hopefully I can get a review copy of that. Brian said, Tamron 17 to 28 versus Sony 24 1.4, same size and weight approximately. Yeah, they are. Look, if I could only choose one of those, I've got both. I'm very, very lucky. If I could only have one, I would choose the Tamron, only because it's so flexible for me in weddings that I can go between that. It's a 17 to 28. Yeah, okay, sorry. If I could only choose one of those, I'd get the GM 24mm. That's if I could choose one out of those two. I thought it was a 28 to 75. Yeah, I wouldn't give up my 24 GM at all. That's stunning, that lens. I love it. But the 17 to 28 too is unbelievable. It was fantastic. I loved using it. I would like to see a video on how you use the wide-angle lens to shoot brides. Yeah, I might do one like that one day. Thanks, David. Sound advice. Thanks, Michelle. Thanks for the donation, Nathaniel. Deepak said, I use my 55 Zeiss and the 2875 for photo video stuff, and we'll get the 14 to 24 Sigma for stills. That's a great idea. I love that combination as well. I love the 55, and I also love the 28 to 75. Video, it's outstanding. And like I said, I used that Tamron yesterday in the studio. It's brilliant. Our biggest problem now is that we have too many good lenses to choose from. Yeah, I know it is. I agree. But we're lucky that at least we have that option. I think I'll skip the 35 1.8 and get the 24 1.4 instead. And I would think that's a good move to do too. If you can afford to get the 24 1.4, I would get it, because if you crop it, you get a 36mm focal length. And you've got a better lens. That's what I think. I agree. I agree totally. And there was a couple of other things. Oh, thank you so much, Michelle. Wow, $25. Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. Wasn't expecting that at all. Thank you so much, Michelle. Love you guys. Again, this is another view of how the lenses look. I wanted to just show this. Oh, I've got to bring it up. I wanted to show this because there's some samples here of some of the lenses being used. This is the 14... Let me just move this over a little bit so that it looks right. These are samples from the 14 to 24mm that are out there. Like I said, I'll put these links down below so you'll be able to have a look at them. But they're just showing how it is, and they look good. I mean, it looks fine. It's hard to tell, I mean, from these two unless you start taking samples yourself. I'm going to talk about this new camera in a second. This is the 35 1.2 in use. Looks lovely. Looks beautiful. Depth of field looks gorgeous. I like the bokeh. Looks beautiful out there. The out of focus rendering looks lovely. Looks like it'll work reasonably well in backlit scenario. Low light's going to be incredible. The Sigma 45 contemporary lens, remember that's only a contemporary. Again, some nice images that you can check. So like I said, I'll leave this in the comments down below so you can have a look at all of these images yourself and let me know in the chat what you think about them. So that's that. So let's go on to the next story. And yeah, thank you so much for that donation, Michelle. What are we on? 104. It's 105 actually. Okay, so this new camera is a bit bizarre. Wow, I just got another donation. Let me just show that one. That was from Robert Adams, gave me $24.99 and love these live chats. Thanks, David. Thank you, Rob. That's brilliant as well. Wow, you guys today have been incredible. Thank you so much. This is a interesting new camera that has just come out. Now, this is another thing that I wanted to talk to you about because is this going to push Sony over the edge? And this is an interesting thing. Now, before we go any further, I want to talk to you about the issues with this camera that before we go any further, it's contrast detection. Now, I think that's because whether they've used a Panasonic sensor or whatever in this, I don't know, but it is contrast detection, and there's no EVF. But I don't think this camera really is being released as a still camera. I think this camera is being released as a video camera. And apparently, there is going to be a module release that is going to be an add-on EVF that will fit it. That's from what I read somewhere this morning. So that's the interesting part about this. But there are some amazing things about this camera that are really quite interesting. It's a fully electronic shutter, and yet they have a flash component that's coming onto this camera. Now, I don't know how they've done that. This is the interesting thing. So if anyone knows, I'd love to know in the chat or even in the chat below. There's no mechanical shutter on this camera at all. So how have they done this flash setup? I don't understand how they've done it if it's just a mechanical shutter. So I'm not sure what is going on with this and how it's possible to do it. But anyway, they've obviously done it because they're showing it. So that's a really interesting scenario. It's full frame, so it is a full frame camera. Really small. Looks like it probably has a full frame HDMI port as well. But there's some interesting things like this tone control is incredible. And I'm going to show you this in a second. We'll go through it a little bit. That's showing, see now the flash module attaches on the side. When I initially saw it, I thought there's no hot sync. That's where the flash sync, the flash module attaches. And I think that's also probably where the EVF will also attach to. So that's probably what's happening there. It's going to be an L-mount lens. So you're going to be able to use L-mount lens. I think that's showing an EVF here as well. That might be the EVF that they were talking about. I'm not sure. And they're even showing it connected on gimbals and things. But the interesting thing about this is it has an expandable ISO of 6. I thought that was a typo, but it's not. It's 6 to 102,400. The standard ISO range is 100 to 25,600. It's an L-mount standard lens, and it only weighs 370 grams. So this thing is really tiny, but it gets better because it supports 12-bit. I mean, get a load of that. It supports 12-bit raw video, basically. It's DNG video, and offers a waveform monitor, shutter angle, and time code. So they really are pushing this as a video camera. It's got the Foveon sensor in it, I believe. But there was some images that I wanted to show you. It might have been on this next page here. This was the announcement that came out. Like I said, I'll put this down below so you can have a look at it. You can see the size of it there. Like I said, it's tiny. You've got 8-bit, 10-bit, 12-bit. It's got a low-pass filterless, so it mustn't have a low-pass filter. Like I said, the ISO goes down to 6 up to 102,000. It's got 14-bit raw DNG. And it has this was the interesting part. It has this tone control which brings up curves. So you can actually, for the first time in any camera that I know of, manipulate a curve on your camera. That's I've never ever heard of that before. This is incredible. And wow, what a feature. I can't believe that feature. That is one of the best things like I'm starting to do more video and even stills, that would be incredible too. But being able to have that control of raising your shadows, lowering your highlights or whatever you want to do in a curve is unbelievable. It's fantastic. It just says here, the smallest and lightest possible body, which one can express their creative ideas with. What else has it got? That's just showing the dimension. It's 370 grams, so it's tiny. It's the world's smallest and lightest full-frame camera. So I suppose there's no IBIS, because I don't think they could put IBIS in there. I think it's too small. I haven't heard IBIS mentioned. So you'd have to stick it on a gimbal. But, wow, this is totally out of left field. I never thought this would happen. So the downsides of this. Downsides are that there's Probably no IBIS. I don't think I read there's IBIS anywhere. There's no EVF, but there is a module you can add on for that if you need it. And it's contrast detection. Now, if you're into full-on videography, that's probably not a big deal because most of them are going to be manually focusing anyway. So I don't think that's probably a big issue. The upsides of this are obviously the bit depths on this camera are nuts. Basically, you're dealing with raw video. Well, they don't mention a global shutter, Altrix, so I'm not sure how it's done. Whether it is a global shutter that's giving you that ability to work the flash out. I can't work out how they get the electronic flash, because it's an electronic shutter, how they can get the flash to work with it, unless it's a global shutter. I don't know what's happening there, because Sony haven't been able to do it with their electronic shutters, so I don't know what's happened in that regard. So it's going to be really interesting to see what happens. The lens is L-mount, so it is going to be expensive, but I believe they were saying that there is going to be a mount to this that you can put other lenses on there as well. So it's going to be more of a universal adapter that you can stick other lenses on. Anyway, fantastic. So I just thought I'd share that with you. All right, so let's open up quickly to Q&A before we finish, because like I said, I've got to head out and go and get some paper for my studio. 1, 1, 1, and it's 112 actually. Oop. All right, so let's open it up to Q&A. So, boy, have we had some interesting things to discuss today. It's been incredible. It really has. Where were we up to? I'll probably start from down here somewhere. Rui said, I'll start from here. Rui said the results of the votes, 14 to 24, 24%, 35, 18%, 45, 16%. None of these 42%. Interesting. Perhaps it was a lot of people were voting that we just wanted to buy Sony lenses. Like I said, the 14 to 24 certainly interests me. The 35 1.2 does as well. I might make a decision on those lenses once I review them, I think. What else have we got? I did read these before, actually. I read them, yep. So let me come back down here. Would the A9 be okay for the A? Yes, it will. It'd be fine, Altric. Yeah, it'd work well on that gimbal. It would work fine, actually. In fact, I found that the A6400 was a little light for it. You had to balance it really, really carefully. Due to the fact I don't think the motors were working even enough. I think the A6400 is a fraction light. It still worked fantastic, but I think the A9 probably would work better. I haven't tested it on it yet, but it will definitely fit within the scope. It's 2.8 kilo, I think, is that, or grams, I should say, is 2.8 kilo is the amount you can put on it. So it'd take it easy. You were discussing it before to having a credit card-like camera and full frame. I think it's an interesting development. I know it's really is interesting. Yeah, I'm not sure what they use, Brett, for the thing. Whether it's a global shutter or what, I don't know. I don't know how they've added flash onto that camera. Gerald said, yes, the Sigma. Oh, I just got another donation too, I think. M. Cubro says, gave me $25. Thank you so much. Dave, thank you for taking your time and your chats. I really appreciate it. David, I knew you meant that, mate. Thank you so much. Wow, you guys have been amazing today. Where else were we? Gerald says, yes, the Sigma FP can add modules for almost any use. It's interesting. Yeah, it is interesting. Look, I'm not sure how it will be. I mean, are any of you interested in this? Or do you think it's dead on arrival? I mean, I'd love to know what you think about this. They're getting into a tough market, though, that's for sure. I'm just not sure about it. Like I said, not having phase detection worries me. I wouldn't buy a camera that didn't have phase detection anymore. So not having phase detection bothers me. Not having IBIS bothers me in the fact that if you're doing this as video, it's great to have IBIS built in. I don't think it has IBIS. I didn't see that anywhere. They're the two things that really worry me. I think it's only got one card slot. That again worries me. But yeah, I mean, I just thought it was an interesting development that I wanted to discuss with you guys. It's not global shutter. Sigma said it's using rolling shutter. Oh, okay. And the maximum flash sync is at 1/30th. Oh, well, I didn't see that. Well, that's not very good. So they're saying the maximum you can do for flash is 1/30th of a second. Oh, that's not very good if that's the case. That's interesting. Jay said, video cameras don't need no EVF, I think, and isn't contrast, auto detection, focus being the base standard? Would be better if it has... Yes, it is if you're dealing with video. Look, they're selling, and they do seem to be selling this as a video type camera, having contrast isn't a big deal because most people do manual focus. I agree. I'm just talking about my perspective in that regard. I believe the video format, though, was like a RAW format, Jay. I think that's what they were talking about. I think I saw a YouTube video showing it could do 4K 120 frames per second, and I'm just blown away. I'm not sure about the specs yet. I'll have to read into it, and I'll have to look at that more later on. It has a global shutter, laugh out loud. No mention of battery time, nope. Being so small, too, it's going to be interesting, isn't it? Downside number one, it's not Sony. William says, cannot be used with a light room. I'm not sure what that means. Oreo said, this camera has a foveon sensor, which means every color has full layer of photo sites and there is no need for color interpolation. Oh, okay, Oreo. Yeah, I forgot that because fovea doesn't it? It has an RGB layer. That's the way that works. Nathaniel says, the tech is amazing, but does that thing look goofy with huge lenses attached? Yeah, I know, it does look a bit funny. Thank you so much for that donation. M. Crubio. Michael says, is in the house. What's up, David? G'day, Michael. Altric says, I was being funny, David. Brett says, interesting. Not even an A9 can do flash, etc. with electronic shutter. Sony could be in trouble if they haven't worked out the electronic shutter with flash. Yeah, I don't know how I'd love to know how they've done that. Like Oreo says, it may be that it's that foveon sensor that has the ability to do that. I want a global shutter, so back. Photomix said, David stacking up today. Yeah, I've done so well today. Thanks so much for the donations, guys. Altric said, oh, what's up? Jay said, what should the Sigma camera cost? Something competing or cheap? I think it probably will have to be around the Blackmagic area, Jay. I think that's probably where they'll be positioning that at. It's the lenses are expensive, though. Until they get that adapter out, the L series lenses are expensive. Deepak says it looks like that Fujicom set modular system. That never came out, did it? And it drops to 1/15th in 14-bit RAW. I have a look at DP Review page 8. Yeah, so if that's the case, the flash system's not very good, because if you do have to limit it to 30th of a second... it's not very good. I suppose you could work around it, but it's not very good. I wonder if it's possible to use high-speed sync, though. That would be the interesting thing, whether it mentions that you can use high... Does it go into high-speed sync after you go over that shutter sync problem? Altric said, I watched you live the other day. He's Russian. Yeah, he's talking to Photomiak. And that's about it. No mention of price. Yeah, it's too early. All right, guys. Thank you so much for a great show. If you can, please give me a thumbs up. Like I said, it does get the show out there to other people. Really appreciate, especially the donations, guys. Thank you so much for the donations today. You guys have been amazing. If you have any questions, put them down in the chat below. I do always answer every question that I get. Or I'll at least, give a love heart that I've read it or something like that. So please get involved in the discussion. Join our photography and videography school. Because we're nearly up to 5,000 subscribers now, so please join us in that group. I'll just show you quickly what that is, just so you know. Oop, new window. Let me just open up Facebook. I'm getting pretty excited because we're getting close to 5,000 subscribers now. So it's doing so well. So please join us there. I'll just open it up so you guys, with 4,904 now. So we're getting really close to having 5,000 subscribers. This is the site here. So it's just make sure you use the Appisand if you're trying to join us, because it's photography and videography school. So please join us on there. It's such a great site with people sharing rumors, videos, images. People are sharing their video links, web pages. It's such a fantastic site, guys. And the other thing too, it's a very positive site. You will not be slammed for putting in work and you know, be criticized in a horrible way that a lot tend to be doing. So please come in and join us there. That would be fantastic if you could do that. Like I said, we're up to 4,900. I've only got 100 to go now. We'll probably do it this week, I would say. So please join us on that side as well. Oh, and the last thing I wanted to mention was, just because I know Gerald bought a one of these little attachments for the... let me just turn on these lights so I can just show you for a second. Where are we? I'll just turn on the hue lights. This little cage that I bought the other day, I said one of the issues with this cage was that the handle at the bottom was metal, and it is, because the one you get with small rig is a metal cage. Now, I just found recently, I bought one of the handles that come out, the extendable handles, and it had a plastic version of that on the bottom. So, Gerald, if you're looking, I've just replaced it with that, and it gets rid of that problem of you not being able to tighten everything with this whole gimbal for the Osmo Action. So I've solved that problem. So if you did watch that video, and I think it's the video before this one, have a look. I've been using it even yesterday, and boy, guys, this thing is fantastic. I love how you can put a conventional ND on this. It's so good. So have a look at that review if you haven't looked at it. It's the Osmo Action cage that I've got there as well. So apart from that, I'll just check that there's nothing that I've missed that was really important. Don't think so. Thanks, David. See you next time. And that's about it. So thank you, everyone. I'll see you all in the next video. I might even pop on live with some of the studio shoots that I'm doing on Sunday, which will be Saturday, your time, US, and in Europe. Apart from that, everyone, I'll catch you all in the next video. Bye for now.